He stood over her, his words like shards of ice on the coldest winter night. "I'm done, Isabel. I'm done with this pathetic life. Done with you." She was 6 months pregnant with his child, clutching a stained ceramic mug he'd gifted her world collapsing in their tiny, damp apartment. He chose another woman, one who promised him a world of glittering success. He threw his pregnant wife out into the pouring rain for a life of luxury, never once looking back. But what happens when the woman you threw away holds the key to your entire world? What happens when you discover the meek, humble woman you discarded is one of the richest people on the continent? This is the story of a devastating betrayal, a secret kept for years, and the moment one man realized he hadn't just lost his wife, he'd thrown away an empire. The rain didn't just fall, it assaulted the city. It hammered against the thin window panes of the small, fourth-floor walk-up apartment that Isabel Clarke and Ethan Cole called home. Inside, the storm was of a different nature, colder and far more destructive. "What do you mean, you're done?" Isabel's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the drumming of the rain and the frantic beating of her own heart. She clutched her rounded belly, a protective instinct kicking in as the world tilted on its axis. Ethan stood by the door, already wearing the expensive trench coat she'd saved for months to buy him for his birthday. It looked out of place in their cramped living room, with its second-hand furniture and her canvases stacked against the wall. He looked out of place. He was a man wearing a costume for a life he desperately wanted, a life that didn't include her. "I mean exactly what I said." His tone was flat, devoid of the warmth she had fallen in love with 5 years ago. "I can't do this anymore, Is. The bills, this shoebox apartment, the constant struggle. I'm meant for more than this." "We're meant for more," she corrected, tears welling in her eyes. "We've always said that. We're a team. I'm working. You're close to that promotion at sterling price. And the baby." Her voice broke. "Ethan, we're having a baby." He finally looked at her, and the cold indifference in his eyes was what broke her. It was a look she'd never seen before, the look of a stranger. "The baby complicates things," he said, as if discussing a minor spreadsheet error. "It's a responsibility I'm not ready for. Not in this poverty." "Poverty?" She choked out a laugh that was more of a sob. "We have food. We have a roof over our heads. We have each other. I thought that was enough to start." "Well, it's not enough for me," he snapped, his voice finally rising. The facade of calm cracked, revealing the ugly ambition and resentment beneath. "I want the corner office, the penthouse suite, the respect that comes with real money, not freelance graphic design and dreams that don't pay the bills." Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her art was her soul, the one thing that was entirely hers. He had once claimed to love that about her. Now he used it as a weapon. A horrible, sickening realization began to dawn on Isabel. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was a verdict that had been reached long ago, and he was only now delivering the sentence. "There's someone else, isn't there?" Ethan didn't flinch. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Her name is Jessica Monroe. Her father is Walter Monroe." The name hit Isabel like a physical blow. Walter Monroe, the real estate titan, a man whose name was synonymous with power and wealth in the city. Ethan had been working on a proposal for Monroe's firm for months. He'd spoken of Jessica, the daughter, a vice president at her father's company. He'd called her a key contact, a shark. "She can give me the life I deserve, Isabel," Ethan continued, his voice taking on a sickeningly earnest tone. "She sees my potential. She's introduced me to people you couldn't even dream of meeting. We have a future. And what about our future? Our baby? Isabel's hands trembled. The mug she held, a silly thing with a cartoon bear that said, "World's Best Hugger," felt impossibly heavy. It was the first gift he'd ever given her. "I'll have my lawyer send over the papers," he said, his hand on the doorknob. "And I'll need you out by the end of the week. Jessica and we're taking a place in the Upper East Side. This apartment, the lease is in my name. I'm terminating it." The cruelty was breathtaking. He wasn't just leaving her, he was erasing her, making her homeless, pregnant, and alone. "Ethan, please," she begged, the last of her pride dissolving into sheer terror. "Don't do this. Not now. Think about our child." He turned, his face a mask of stone. "I am. And I think this child is better off not being raised in a place like this, by someone with no ambition." He paused, delivering the final, soul-crushing blow. "Jessica and I might start our own family one day. A proper one." The ceramic mug slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the worn linoleum floor. The sound was deafening in the sudden silence. The cartoon bear was in pieces, just like her heart, just like her life. Ethan looked at the mess on the floor with disgust, then back at her. "Clean that up," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. And then he opened the door and walked out into the storm, leaving Isabel in the ruins of the life they had built. The sound of the shattering mug echoing the complete and total demolition of her world. She sank to the floor, her body racked with sobs, her hands protectively wrapped around the child he had just disowned. She was alone. Utterly and completely alone. The next 3 days were a blur of numb disbelief and rising panic. The sound of the front door closing behind Ethan echoed in Isabel's ears, a permanent, taunting reminder of her new reality. The apartment, once a cozy haven filled with shared laughter and the smell of her oil paints, now felt like a tomb. Every object was a memory, every memory a fresh wound. She packed her life into 2 worn suitcases and a cardboard box. Her art supplies, the few clothes that still fit over her growing belly, a handful of photos from a time when Ethan's smiles were genuine. He had been true to his word. A crisp, formal email from a law firm, Goldman, Finch and Associates, had arrived the next morning, informing her of the dissolution of their marriage and the termination of the lease. He had even cancelled their joint bank account, leaving her with the $274 she had in her purse. Her best friend, Maya Singh, a fiery junior associate at a rival law firm, was apoplectic. "He can't just do this! Izzy, this is illegal! Spousal abandonment! Duress! I'll bury him in litigation!" Maya's voice crackled with rage over the phone. Isabel, sitting on the floor of the now empty apartment, could barely summon the energy to respond. "He has the better lawyers, Maya. He has the Monroes. What do I have? $200 and a box of pastels." "You have me," Maya said fiercely. "Stay with me. We'll figure this out." But Isabel couldn't bring herself to do it. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. To show up on her friend's doorstep, pregnant and abandoned, felt like the ultimate admission of failure. She had chosen Ethan. She had defended him to everyone who had ever harbored a doubt. And now, this. "I just need a few days to think," she lied, forcing a strength she didn't feel into her voice. "I'll check into a motel, clear my head." The motel she found was on the bleakest edge of the city, a place where neon signs flickered with dying ambition, and the carpet smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The room was tiny, the bedspread was scratchy, and the window looked out onto a brick wall. It was the physical manifestation of her life. A dead end. For 2 days she barely moved, alternating between bouts of hysterical crying and long, vacant hours staring at the water-stained ceiling. She ate saltine crackers and drank tap water, trying to convince herself it was for the baby. The baby. A tiny, innocent life was depending on her, and she had never felt more useless, more broken. Ethan's face flashed in her mind. Not the cold stranger from that night, but the charming, ambitious man she'd fallen for. The man who'd quoted poetry during their first date, who'd held her for hours after her mother's funeral, who'd sworn he would love her forever. Was it all a lie? Or had she been so blinded by love that she'd refused to see the rot growing beneath the surface? On the third night, her money was nearly gone. The motel bill was due in the morning. Her phone buzzed with another frantic message from Maya. She ignored it. The panic was no longer a rising tide. It was a tsunami, and it was about to pull her under. She looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. She saw not just a heartbroken woman, but a fool, a naive girl who had believed in a fairy tale. Her family had warned her. Oh, how they had warned her. Not with anger, but with a quiet, concerned caution. They had seen something in Ethan she hadn't, a ravenous hunger for status that would eventually consume everything else. She had cut herself off from them, not out of malice, but out of a fierce, desperate need to prove them wrong, to prove her love was real and her choices were sound. She had insisted on living this normal life, on her own terms, without a safety net. Now, the net was gone, the tightrope had snapped, and she was in a freefall, clutching her stomach, feeling the faint flutter of her child inside. A different feeling began to surface through the grief and shame. Anger. A cold, hard diamond of fury. Fury at Ethan. Fury at Jessica Monroe. But most of all, fury at herself for letting this happen, for allowing herself to become this helpless. Her baby deserved more than a mother staring at a motel ceiling, waiting for the world to crush her. Her baby deserved a fighter. With a trembling hand, she reached for her phone. She scrolled past Maya's name, past the blocked number of her estranged husband, all the way down the contact list. Her finger hovered for a long, agonizing moment over a name she hadn't dialed in over a year. A name that represented a world she had run away from, a world of unimaginable power and privilege, a world she had sworn she didn't need. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Isabel Clarke pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. A deep, familiar voice answered, crisp and formal, a voice that commanded boardrooms and brought titans of industry to heel. Adrienne DeLuca. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in days, they were not tears of despair. They were tears of surrender, of desperation, of a final, last-ditch hope. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's me. It's Isabel. I need you to come get me. I've made a terrible mistake." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. For a terrifying second, Isabel thought he might hang up, that her stubborn pride had finally eroded the last of his patience. But Adrienne DeLuca was a man who processed information with the speed of a supercomputer and acted with the precision of a surgeon. "Give me your location. Do not move," he said. The voice was stripped of emotion, but beneath the command was a current of urgency she hadn't heard in years. She recited the seedy motel's address, her voice barely a whisper. "A car will be there in 20 minutes, he stated. "The driver's name is Arthur. He will have a password, St. Moritz. Do not get in the car unless he gives you that name. Is that understood?" "Yes, Dad," she sobbed, relief washing over her so intensely her knees went weak. "Isabel," he added, and for the first time, a sliver of the father she knew broke through the CEO's facade. "Hold on, we're coming." The line went dead. True to his word, exactly 19 minutes later, a sleek, black Bentley Mulsanne, so silent it seemed to materialize out of the city grime, pulled up in front of the motel. A man in a tailored black suit, with graying temples and a calm, professional demeanor, stepped out. He was exactly as she remembered him. Arthur, her father's head of security for over 30 years. He met her at the door of her room, his eyes sweeping over her disheveled state and the cheap motel with a practiced impassivity that betrayed nothing. But Isabel saw a flicker of something in his gaze, concern, maybe even pity. "Miss Isabel," he said, his voice a low, respectful rumble. "It's good to see you." "Hello, Arthur," she managed, clutching her 2 suitcases. He gently took them from her. "The password is St. Moritz," he said, the formality a strange comfort in her chaotic world. "Thank you," she whispered. He led her to the car, opening the heavy rear door to reveal an interior of soft cream leather and polished burr walnut that smelled faintly of her father's cologne. The world of the motel, the peeling paint, the flickering lights, the desperation, seemed to dissolve as the door closed with a muted, expensive thud. She was in a different universe now. The universe she had abandoned. The drive was silent. They left the city's gritty edges behind, gliding onto highways that led to the manicured, tree-lined avenues of the super-rich. An hour later, they turned onto a private road, flanked by a 10-foot stone wall. Massive, wrought-iron gates, bearing a stylized D, swung open silently as they approached. The De Luca estate. It wasn't a house. It was a principality. A sprawling limestone mansion that blended classic European architecture with modern glass walls, set on 100 acres of rolling hills, private lakes, and ancient forests. It was the place she had grown up, a gilded cage she had felt compelled to escape in search of something real. Looking at it now, after the harsh reality of the last few days, it looked like the safest place on earth. Arthur pulled up to the grand entrance, where the lights were blazing. As he opened her door, another figure emerged from the house. Adrian De Luca stood at the top of the marble steps, a formidable silhouette against the bright light. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that could dissect a balance sheet or a man's character from 100 paces. He wore a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, but he still radiated an aura of immense power. As Isabel slowly climbed the steps, he descended to meet her. His face was a mask of stern control, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, were filled with a storm of emotions, anger, relief, and a deep, profound sadness. He stopped in front of her, his gaze dropping to her pregnant belly, then rising to meet her tear-filled eyes. "You should have called sooner," he said, his voice rough. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, laced with the pain of a father who felt he'd failed to protect his child. "I was ashamed," she whispered. "I was so wrong, Dad, about everything, about him." He didn't say, "I told you so," though the words hung unspoken in the air between them. He had seen Ethan Cole for exactly what he was, from their very first meeting, a shallow social climber with an insatiable appetite for more. He had seen the way Ethan's eyes had lingered on the paintings on the wall, not with appreciation for the art, but with the quick calculation of an appraiser. Instead of lecturing her, Adrian De Luca did something he rarely did. He pulled his daughter into a firm, protective embrace. He held her as she finally let go of the last of her crumbling composure, her body shaking with silent sobs against his chest. "It doesn't matter now," he murmured into her hair. "None of it matters. You're home. You're safe. And no one," he added, his voice hardening into steel, "will ever hurt you or my grandchild again. I will personally see to it." He pulled back, holding her at arm's length and looking at her with an intensity that made her shiver. "First, we get you healthy. We get you strong." Then, a dangerous glint appeared in his eye. "We will deal with Mr. Ethan Cole and the Monroes. They have made a grave miscalculation. They thought they were swatting a fly. They have no idea they've just poked a dragon." He guided her inside, into the grand foyer where the staff was waiting discreetly. The warmth, the quiet efficiency, the sheer scale of the place. It was overwhelming. He had already summoned her old doctor and a nutritionist. A suite of rooms overlooking the gardens was being prepared for her. The full force of the DeLuca Empire was mobilizing, not for a corporate takeover, but to heal one broken heart and protect one unborn child. Isabel leaned on her father's arm, feeling a strange mix of relief and trepidation. She had escaped this world to find herself. Now, she had returned to it, broken to save herself. The irony was not lost on her, but as she looked up at the determined, formidable man beside her, she knew one thing for certain. The game had just changed, and Ethan Cole was about to find out what it truly meant to be powerless. The weeks that followed were a period of quiet, meticulous reconstruction. The DeLuca estate became a sanctuary, a high-tech cocoon designed to heal and fortify her. The first order of business was her health and the baby's. Dr. Alistair Finch, the family's physician for 2 generations, oversaw her care with a team of specialists. A nutritionist planned her meals, a prenatal yoga instructor worked with her in a sun-drenched atrium, and a therapist helped her navigate the treacherous emotional terrain of her grief and betrayal. Slowly, the haunted look in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a growing resolve. She gained weight, her skin regained its color, and her baby bump grew firm and healthy. The initial shame of her return was gradually supplanted by a quiet gratitude. She had run from this world of privilege, believing it was hollow. Now she understood it for what it was, a tool, a powerful one. Her father, Adrian, was a constant, steady presence. He didn't coddle her. Instead, he started bringing her files. At first, they were reports from the DeLuca Foundation, the family's massive philanthropic arm. "Read this," he'd say, dropping a thick binder on the table beside her. "A proposal for a new arts endowment for underprivileged youth. They're being stonewalled by the city council. Find the flaw in their approach." Isabel, who had only ever used her artistic talent for small freelance projects, found a new application for her creativity. She saw the world differently than the corporate sharks on the Foundation's board. She redesigned the proposal, focusing on human stories and community impact rather than dry statistics. She storyboarded a presentation that was emotional, powerful, and undeniable. Adrian reviewed her work, a single appreciative nod his highest form of praise. "Good. You have your mother's eye for the heart of a matter." He began to pull her deeper into the business. She sat in on video conferences, initially as a silent observer. She listened as her father and his executive team discussed billion-dollar acquisitions, hostile takeovers, and global market strategies. It was a language she had once tuned out, but now she listened intently. She was no longer Isabel Clarke, the struggling artist. She was Isabel DeLuca, and this was her birthright. The intelligence that had been focused on color theory and composition now absorbed financial projections and legal frameworks. She took a particular interest in a new venture capital division of DeLuca Industries, one focused on funding sustainable technology startups. It was an area the older, more conservative board members were skeptical of, but Isabel saw the future in it. She spent her nights devouring research, preparing counter-arguments, and identifying promising companies. One evening, she presented a detailed 50-page analysis to her father, outlining why they should invest heavily in a small, unknown company developing biodegradable plastics. He read the entire document in silence. When he finished, he looked at her, his expression unreadable. This is a high-risk, high-reward play. It goes against our current portfolio strategy. Isabel's heart sank. I understand. I just thought. I'm appointing you to the Oversight Committee for the Venture Capital Fund, effective tomorrow, he cut in. You will champion this. If it succeeds, the credit is yours. If it fails, he paused, a slight smile touching his lips. The blame is also yours. Welcome to the family business, Isabel. She wasn't just healing, she was transforming. The fragile girl who had crumpled to the floor of a tiny apartment was being forged into something new, something stronger, something with the resources of an empire at her back. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan Cole was living the life he had always dreamed of. He and Jessica Munro had moved into a stunning, glass-walled penthouse overlooking Central Park. His wardrobe was now filled with designer suits, his wrist adorned with a watch that cost more than his old car, and his social calendar was a whirlwind of exclusive parties, gallery openings, and charity galas. He had been given a vice president title at Munro Holdings, with a corner office and a salary that was, frankly, obscene. He was Walter Munro's golden boy, the sharp, ambitious young man who was also dating his daughter. It was perfect. Or, it was almost perfect. The gloss began to wear off surprisingly quickly. The penthouse, for all its splendor, never felt like home. It was Jessica's space, decorated by a fashionable interior designer with a taste for cold, minimalist furniture that was beautiful to look at, but uncomfortable to live in. There was no room for anything of his. Not that he had much to bring. Jessica, who had been so charming and seductive during their clandestine affair, was different now. She was possessive, demanding, and possessed a casual cruelty that often took his breath away. She criticized his choice of tie, his pronunciation of a French wine, the way he held his fork. He was her project, a handsome accessory she was molding to fit her world. Their conversations rarely touched on anything personal. They were about appearances, connections, and transactions. There was no warmth, no intimacy, none of the easy laughter he had once shared with Isabel. His work at Munro Holdings was also not what he had envisioned. He wasn't a rising star. He was an errand boy with a fancy title. Walter Munro didn't mentor him. He used him. Ethan was tasked with the grunt work on a massive new development project, the Phoenix Tower. He spent his days chasing permits, placating angry union reps, and preparing endless presentations that Walter would then deliver as his own. He was a highly paid functionary, a cog in the Munro machine, given just enough status to keep him compliant. One night, sitting in a restaurant where the water cost more than a full meal at the diner he and Isabel used to frequent, he found himself thinking about her. He pictured her in their old apartment, laughing as she accidentally smudged paint on her nose. The memory was so vivid, so filled with a warmth that was entirely absent from his current life, that it felt like a punch to the gut. He pushed the thought away, taking a sip of his $300 bottle of wine. This was what he wanted. He had won. He was successful. He was happy. He just had to keep telling himself that until it felt true. His friends, like his former colleague Ben Carter, saw the change. Ben met him for a drink one evening, an awkward encounter Ethan had agreed to out of some lingering sense of his old life. "You look good, man." "Tired but good," Ben said, eyeing Ethan's expensive suit. "It's a demanding role," Ethan said, trying to sound important. "I bet." "So how's Isabel?" Ben asked, his tone cautious. "Nobody's heard from her." Ethan stiffened. "I have no idea. We're divorced. She's out of my life." "Right, but pregnant and all." "I just hope she's okay." "She's a survivor," Ethan said dismissively, though a cold knot of something, guilt, curiosity, tightened in his stomach. He had made no effort to check on her. He had sent the legal papers and a single paltry check as a final settlement, which had been returned, uncashed, by her lawyer. He had taken it as a sign she wanted nothing to do with him, and had been relieved. As he walked back to his gleaming, empty penthouse that night, the city lights glittering below like a carpet of scattered diamonds, he felt a profound and unsettling loneliness. He had everything he had ever wanted. So why did he feel like he had nothing at all? 6 months after Ethan had walked out on Isabel, the Phoenix Tower project was his entire world. It was Walter Monroe's magnum opus, a towering skyscraper of shimmering glass and steel that was set to redefine the city's skyline. For Ethan, it was the symbol of his new life, the tangible proof that his brutal choice had been the right one. His name was on the internal memos. He sat in the high-level meetings, and he basked in the reflected glory of the Monroe Empire. But the project was a voracious beast, constantly demanding more. More money, more political maneuvering, more of Ethan's soul. The initial funding tranches were secured, but to complete the ambitious final phase, a state-of-the-art sustainable energy system and a public art installation, Monroe Holdings needed a massive infusion of capital from a private investor. "This is the final piece of the puzzle, Ethan," Walter Monroe had boomed in a recent meeting, his large hand clapping Ethan's shoulder with a force that was more of a blow than a friendly gesture. "The investor we're courting is notoriously private, old money. They control one of the most powerful and diversified funds in the country. If we land them, the Phoenix Tower isn't just a building. It's a legacy. Don't screw this up." The pressure was immense. Ethan worked 18-hour days, his life reduced to spreadsheets, architectural drawings, and pandering to Jessica's whims. The cracks in his gilded cage were becoming impossible to ignore. Jessica's affection was directly proportional to his utility to her father. When he secured a difficult permit, she was loving. When a construction delay was announced, she was icy and dismissive. Love was a transaction, and his value was constantly being audited. He started having nightmares about Isabel. Not of the fight, but of the good times. Picnics in the park, lazy Sunday mornings, the quiet way she'd look at him from across a room, her eyes full of a love so unconditional it now seemed like a fantasy. He would wake up in the cold, sterile bedroom of the penthouse with a hollow ache in his chest, the faint scent of Jessica's expensive perfume doing nothing to comfort him. The first concrete whisper of his old life came from Ben Carter. They met for their now infrequent, strained drink. "You're not going to believe this," Ben said, scrolling through his phone. "Remember that tech startup, BioVera, that our firm passed on last year? The one developing those biodegradable polymers?" Ethan vaguely recalled it, a high-risk venture he himself had advised against. "What about them?" "They just secured a $50 million seed round," Ben said, his eyes wide, "from a new VC fund that's making huge waves, DeLuca Venture Partners. Apparently, the person who championed the deal and spotted their potential is some rising star on their board. Total genius, they're saying." The name DeLuca pricked at Ethan's consciousness. It was a powerful name, one associated with old-world industry and staggering, quiet wealth. It wasn't a name you heard often, because they didn't need the publicity. Never heard of the fund, Ethan lied, feigning disinterest. A week later, a second whisper came, this time from a more public source. Jessica was dragging him to the annual City Arts Patronage Gala, a stuffy event he despised. As they stood by the bar, Jessica air-kissing various socialites, Ethan overheard a conversation between two older, impeccably dressed women. "Absolutely saved the Youth Arts Initiative," one was saying. "The city was about to defund it entirely." "I know," the other replied. And then the DeLuca Foundation swept in. It wasn't just the money. Their new director of community engagement completely revamped the proposal. They say she has an artist's soul, but a titan's mind, a real force of nature. What was her name again? Isabel something. Ethan's blood ran cold. He turned his head slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. Isabel. It couldn't be. There were thousands of Isabels in the city, and DeLuca. It was just a coincidence. His Isabel was a freelance designer who struggled to pay her bills. She wasn't a force of nature on the board of a major foundation. It was impossible. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was a poisonous one. That night, fueled by a terrifying curiosity he couldn't suppress, he did something he hadn't done in months. He went online, not to look at financial news or real estate blogs, but to search for her. He didn't search for Isabel Clarke. He knew that would lead to a dead end. On a gut-wrenching hunch, he typed Isabel DeLuca into the search bar. The results hit him like a physical shock. There were only a few, as the family was notoriously private. But they were enough. A brief mention in a press release from the DeLuca Foundation announcing her appointment. A single, low-resolution photo of her in the background of a group shot at a university dedication, her father, Adrian DeLuca, at the podium. But it was her. Older, more polished. Her hair was styled differently. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored dress, and she held herself with a confidence he'd never seen before. She was standing tall, her pregnancy now a beautiful, proud curve under the elegant fabric. She looked powerful, radiant, and completely out of his reach. DeLuca. His mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. The quiet, humble artist he had married. The daughter of Adrian DeLuca? The man who was a legend, a phantom of the financial world, whose net worth was a subject of speculative fantasy among finance bros. It didn't make sense. She had lived with him in a tiny apartment, worried about grocery bills, wore clothes from thrift stores. Why? The answer came crashing down on him with the force of a physical blow. She had wanted to be loved for herself. Not for her name, not for her money. She had given him the ultimate test, and he had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. He stumbled back from his laptop, gasping for air. The penthouse, his expensive suit, the watch on his wrist. It all felt like cheap plastic, a pathetic consolation prize. He hadn't traded up. He had traded down. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. He thought of the final investor for the Phoenix Tower, the private, powerful, old money fund that Walter Monroe was so desperate to impress, the fund that held the key to his entire future. A cold, sick dread pooled in his stomach. He didn't know who the investor was. Walter had kept the name a closely guarded secret, referring to them only as the client. But as Ethan stared at the picture of Isabel DeLuca, standing confidently beside her billionaire father, he had a sinking, terrifying feeling that he was about to find out. The night of the Phoenix Tower Investor Gala was the culmination of everything Ethan had worked for and sacrificed for. The event was held in a cavernous, beautifully restored industrial space, glittering with crystal chandeliers and the clinking of champagne flutes. The most powerful people in the city were there: real estate moguls, banking CEOs, politicians, and socialites. It was the world Ethan had killed his past self to enter. He stood beside Jessica and her father, a perfect picture of a successful young executive. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that cost more than 6 months' rent on his old apartment. He smiled, he shook hands, he made witty small talk. But inside, he was a hollow man, haunted by the digital ghost of Isabel DeLuca. His discovery had consumed him for weeks, a secret terror that gnawed at his insides. He'd tried to dismiss it as a wild coincidence, but the gnawing certainty in his gut told him otherwise. "Showtime, kid," Walter Monroe grunted, giving him a hard pat on the back. "The client is here. Their chief investment officer is making the rounds, but the final decision-maker is about to make their entrance. Remember, be charming. This deal makes or breaks us." Jessica squeezed his arm, her nails digging in slightly. "Don't embarrass me, Ethan. A lot is riding on this. My father's reputation. Our future." The unspoken threat was clear. His position in this world was entirely conditional. A hush fell over the crowd as the master of ceremonies took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed through the speakers, "it gives us immense pleasure to have you here tonight to celebrate the future of our city's skyline, the Phoenix Tower. This ambitious project would not be possible without visionary partners. Tonight, we are honored to finally announce the primary investor whose commitment and belief will bring this vision to life." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. His palms were slick with sweat. "Please don't be them. Please be anyone else. This investment is being spearheaded by their newest, most dynamic division, a fund dedicated to forward-thinking, sustainable urban development. Please join me in giving a massive welcome to the leadership of DeLuca Venture Partners." The name hit the room like a thunderclap. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. DeLuca. They never came to these things. They operated from the shadows. For them to publicly back a project was an endorsement of monumental significance. Walter Monroe's eyes were wide, with a mixture of shock and elation. He had landed the biggest whale in the ocean. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He felt Jessica's grip on his arm tighten to a painful degree. "And now," the MC continued, "it is my distinct honor to introduce the individual whose brilliant analysis and passionate advocacy made this partnership possible. A visionary new leader in the world of finance and philanthropy. Please welcome the head of the DeLuca Foundation's Committee for Urban Development and a senior partner at DVP, Ms. Isabel DeLuca." The world went into slow motion for Ethan. From a side entrance, she emerged. She was no longer the quiet, unassuming artist he had discarded. This was a different woman entirely. She wore a simple, elegant evening gown of deep emerald green that accentuated her now very prominent, beautiful baby bump. Her hair was swept up, revealing a graceful neck and a pair of diamond earrings that glittered like captive stars. But it wasn't the clothes or the jewels that stunned him into silence. It was her presence. She moved with an unshakable confidence, a serene power that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. She was not just a guest here. She was the center of gravity. Her eyes swept across the room, calm and appraising. When her gaze finally fell upon him, standing beside the Monroes, it was for the briefest of moments. There was no flicker of anger, no hint of pain, no sign of recognition at all. It was the cool, indifferent glance one might give a piece of furniture or a nameless waiter. In that single, dismissive look, he was utterly and completely erased. It was more devastating than any scream, any curse, any tearful accusation could ever have been. He was nothing to her. Isabel walked to the stage, taking the microphone. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady, resonating with an authority that belied her years. "Thank you," she began, a small, polite smile on her lips. DeLuca Venture Partners is proud to invest in the future. We believe in building legacies that are not just profitable, but sustainable and beneficial for the entire community. She spoke for 5 minutes about urban renewal, green technology, and community arts funding, the very things he had mocked as her pointless, unprofitable dreams. She was eloquent, intelligent, and utterly captivating. The crowd was hanging on her every word. Ethan felt Walter Monroe's hand clamp down on his shoulder. "DeLuca!" Walter hissed in his ear, his voice a dangerous mix of fury and confusion. "Your ex-wife is Isabel DeLuca, the daughter of Adrian DeLuca, and you failed to mention this." I didn't know," Ethan stammered, his mind short-circuiting. Jessica stared at him, her perfectly made-up face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her dream of marrying into power had just been eclipsed by the grotesque irony that her boyfriend had thrown away a literal princess to be with her. The value of her own transaction had just plummeted. After her speech, Isabel was immediately surrounded by a coterie of the city's most influential people, all vying for a moment of her time. Walter, seeing his legacy on the line, pasted on a sycophantic smile and began to drag Ethan and Jessica towards her. "We need to smooth this over." "Now," he snarled under his breath. They pushed through the crowd, finally breaking into the circle around Isabel. She was in conversation with the mayor. "Ms. DeLuca," Walter boomed, his voice oozing false charm. "A magnificent speech, Walter Monroe, and this is my daughter, Jessica, and my vice president, Ethan Cole." Isabel turned her head slowly. She gave Walter and Jessica a brief professional nod. Then her eyes landed on Ethan. The cool indifference was gone, replaced by something far worse, a faint, almost pitying curiosity. She looked at him as if he were a mildly interesting insect she'd found under a rock. "Mr. Monroe?" she said, her voice like polished steel. She did not acknowledge Ethan's name or existence. She turned back to the mayor. "As I was saying, Mr. Mayor, the Foundation's primary condition for the arts grant is that it remains independent of the developer's influence." She had cut him dead. In front of the mayor, in front of Walter, in front of the entire city's power structure. She hadn't just ignored him, she had surgically and expertly rendered him invisible. The humiliation was a physical force, sucking the air from his lungs. He was no longer Ethan Cole, the rising star. He was a footnote in the story of Isabel DeLuca's spectacular return. The man who was too stupid to realize who he had. The man who threw away an empire for a penthouse. As she laughed at something the mayor said, one hand resting protectively on her unborn child, his unborn child, Ethan finally understood. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had committed an act of self-destruction so complete, so catastrophic, that he would be falling from it for the rest of his life, and he had only just begun to hit the ground. The fallout from the gala was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, systematic demolition of Ethan's life. The car ride back to the penthouse was a tomb of frigid silence. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, the facade shattered. "You absolute moron!" Jessica's voice was a venomous shriek. She threw her diamond-encrusted clutch against the wall, where it hit with a sickening thud. "You had Isabel DeLuca, and you threw her away. For me? Do you have any idea how this makes me look? How this makes my father look?" "I told you, I didn't know," Ethan pleaded, his voice hoarse. She never said anything. We lived in a walk-up. We worried about bills. How could I have known? Because you're a fool, Walter Monroe interjected, his face purple with rage. He had followed them up. You're a climber, Cole. I knew that from the start. I thought it made you hungry. I didn't realize it made you blind, deaf, and stupid. You were married to the heiress of the DeLuca fortune, and you were complaining to me about your bonus? He paced the room like a caged animal. This entire deal, the Phoenix Tower, our reputation. It's all tied to her now, and you, the man who publicly humiliated her, are my VP and my daughter's boyfriend. You are a liability, a walking, breathing, multi-million-dollar liability. The next morning, the consequences began. Ethan arrived at his office to find his access card denied. When he was finally escorted upstairs by security, it was to Walter's office. A single cardboard box sat on the gleaming mahogany desk. "You're finished," Walter said, not even bothering to look at him. He was on the phone, presumably with someone from DeLuca's team, trying to salvage the deal. "Your position is terminated. Pack your things and get out of my building." "Walter, please," Ethan begged. "I can talk to her. I can fix this." Walter finally looked at him, his eyes filled with a contempt so profound it made Ethan flinch. "You are the last person on earth she wants to hear from. You talking to her would be like pouring gasoline on a fire." The DeLucas sent over a revised preliminary agreement this morning. It included a new clause. He slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was an addendum, and one line was highlighted. Clause 7.4a. The immediate and permanent termination of employment and all business associations with Mr. Ethan Cole is a non-negotiable precondition for this partnership. It was her. Quietly, efficiently, and with the cold precision of a surgeon, she had excised him from the picture. There was no emotion, just a business decision. He was a bad asset, and she was liquidating him. "Get out," Walter repeated, his voice dangerously low. Humiliated, Ethan packed his few personal items into the box and was escorted out of the building, past the staring, whispering eyes of his former colleagues. When he got back to the penthouse, he found Jessica overseeing two men who were packing his designer suits into cheap garment bags. "What's this?" he asked, his stomach sinking. "I'm moving on, Ethan," she said, examining her nails with a bored expression. "Our association is no longer mutually beneficial. You have nothing left to offer me. In fact, you're a stain on my reputation. I need you gone by noon." "Jessica, after everything, you're just throwing me out." She finally looked at him, a cruel smirk on her face. "You seem to have a talent for getting thrown out. I should have realized. The problem wasn't your situation, it was you. You don't recognize value when you're staring it right in the face." By lunchtime, he was on the street with one box of personal effects and two garment bags of clothes that no longer felt like his. The penthouse, the job, the money, the woman, it had all been a mirage, and it had vanished, leaving him choking on the dust. His downfall was swift and brutal. His name was blacklisted in the financial and real estate communities. The story, though not public, spread like wildfire through the back channels of the city's elite. He was the fool who had scorned a DeLuca. No one would touch him. He couldn't get a call back for even the most junior analyst positions. He burned through his savings in a matter of weeks, moving from a hotel to a short-term rental, and finally to a grimy, single-room apartment that was even smaller and more depressing than the one he had once shared with Isabel. He sold the expensive watch, then the designer clothes, just to make rent. He was right back where he started, only this time he was completely alone. His so-called friends from his new life vanished. Even Ben Carter stopped returning his calls, disgusted by the full story of his cruelty to Isabel. He was a pariah. One rainy afternoon, as he sat in his squalid room eating canned soup, the full weight of his actions crashed down on him. He hadn't just lost a wealthy wife. He had lost the only person who had ever truly loved him. He had destroyed the genuine, loving partnership he'd had with Isabel for a counterfeit version of success. He had craved authenticity and power, and in his greed, he had traded the former for a brief, intoxicating loan of the latter. He thought of his unborn child, a child who would have the DeLuca name, a child who would grow up in a world of unimaginable opportunity, surrounded by love and security, a child who would be raised to see him not as a father, but as a cautionary tale, a ghost. The ambition that had driven him his entire life was gone, replaced by a profound, crushing emptiness. He looked around the damp, miserable room, a mirror image of the life he had so callously discarded. Karma, he realized with a bitter, hollow laugh, wasn't just a concept. It was a ledger, and his account was now deeply, irrevocably in the red. Months bled into a bleak spring, finding Ethan a ghost of his former self. His new reality was stocking grocery shelves at night, a menial penance for a lifetime of greed. The final crushing blow came from a brief Society column mention: the birth of Nicholas Clark DeLuca, her son, her name, a life he was completely erased from. A desperate need, not for forgiveness, but for confession, consumed him. He learned she would be dedicating a new children's wing at the city hospital, a project she had funded, and knew it was his only chance to face her. He stood across the street, a spectator to the life that should have been his. When the ceremony ended, she emerged, the picture of maternal grace, holding her child. Her eyes scanned the crowd and found him. For a moment, he saw a flicker of the past in her gaze, but it was instantly replaced by cool composure. A moment later, her security guard, Arthur, approached him. "Miss DeLuca will give you 2 minutes." They met on a nearby park bench. The chasm between them felt as wide as an ocean. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words raw and stripped of all artifice. "Isabel, for everything. I was a fool, cruel and weak, and I threw away the only real thing in my life. I don't want anything. I just needed you to know." She listened, her expression calm and unreadable. The silence stretched, amplifying the sound of the city around them. "I accept your apology, Ethan," she said finally, her voice soft but unbreakable. "Not for you, but for me. Holding on to anger is a burden, and my hands are quite full these days." She glanced lovingly towards her son, now with his nanny nearby. "This is my life now. My son, my work, my family. It's a full life. A happy one. The past," she met his eyes with a look of utter finality, "has no place here." She stood up, her poise unshakable. "I hope you find peace, Ethan. Goodbye." Without a backward glance, she walked away, returning to her car, to her son, to her future. Ethan remained on the bench, a relic of a past she had already moved on from. He had his closure, the final, painful acknowledgement that while his life had effectively ended that rainy night, hers, in the truest sense, had just begun. And so, Ethan learned the hardest lesson of all. Some things, once broken, can never be repaired. He had chased a world of glittering surfaces, only to discover he'd traded away the one person who was pure gold. Isabel's story isn't just about the stunning reversal of fortune. It's a powerful testament to the quiet strength that lies within us when we're pushed to our absolute limit. It's about rediscovering your own worth when someone else tries to render you worthless. It's a story about karma, and how the universe has a way of balancing the books in the most spectacular fashion. Have you ever seen someone so spectacularly underestimate the person they were with? What do you think was the most satisfying moment of Ethan's downfall? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, betrayal, and ultimate triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next gripping story we have in store for you. Thank you for listening. He thought he held all the cards. At the peak of New York Fashion Week, the most photographed event of the year, Gideon Vance was ready to unveil his new life. On his arm wasn't his quiet, unassuming wife, but his dazzling mistress, a woman he was proudly introducing as his future. He was moments away from a promotion that would cement his legacy. But in a world built on image and power, the most devastating secrets are the ones hidden in plain sight. What happens when the woman you cast aside is revealed to be the one who owns your entire world? Get ready for a story of betrayal, public humiliation, and epic revenge that proves you should never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and simmering resentment. Gideon Vance adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, showing a man carved from ambition. Tonight was the apex of his career, the culmination of a decade spent clawing his way up the corporate ladder at Aurelian Vanguard, the global luxury fashion conglomerate. The annual Vanguard Gala, the centerpiece of New York Fashion Week, was his stage. And tonight, he would finally shed the last vestige of his old, unremarkable life. That life was currently standing by the doorway to their master bedroom, holding a lint roller. Catherine, his wife of 12 years. "You have a little something on your shoulder, dear," she said, her voice soft, almost apologetic, as if his perfection was a shared responsibility, and she had somehow failed in her part. Gideon didn't turn. He just glanced at his reflection, a flicker of irritation crossing his handsome face. "I've got it, Catherine." He brushed at the invisible speck on his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. The suit was a statement. It screamed power, success, and a future she was not part of. Catherine retreated slightly, the lint roller held in her hand like a useless talisman. She was dressed in a simple, elegant but forgettable navy blue dress. It was the kind of dress women wore when they didn't want to be noticed, when their primary function was to be a supportive shadow. For 12 years, she had played that role to perfection. She had organized his life, hosted his dull but necessary business dinners, remembered the birthdays of his superiors' children, and celebrated his every minor victory as if it were the moon landing. She had been the perfect, quiet, background-dwelling wife, and he was so incredibly tired of it. "Is the car ready?" he asked, his tone clipped. He picked up his phone, the screen lighting up with a message from Crystal, a picture of her in a shimmering, backless silver gown. The caption read, "Ready to be unveiled, my love. XOXO." A slow, predatory smile touched Gideon's lips. "It's been waiting downstairs for 10 minutes, Catherine replied. He could hear the faint tremor in her voice. She wasn't stupid. She knew something had been wrong for months. The late nights he no longer bothered to explain, the scent of a different perfume on his shirts, the cold chasm that had opened between them in their king-sized bed. But she never confronted him. That was the thing about Catherine. She was pathologically conflict-averse. She absorbed his neglect and cruelty with a quiet, maddening stoicism. "Good," he said, pocketing his phone. "I'm heading out." He finally turned to face her. He allowed his gaze to sweep over her, from her sensible low heels to her neatly pinned brown hair. There was nothing wrong with her. She was pleasant-looking, gentle. But she was wallpaper, in a world of vibrant, clashing, statement-making art. She was beige wallpaper. He was a masterpiece, trapped in a beige room. "You look nice," he offered, the compliment as empty as the promises he'd made at their wedding. "You look incredible, Gideon," she said, and her sincerity was like a dull ache in his chest. "I hope you have a wonderful night. I know how important it is for the head of North American Operations promotion." "It's practically mine," he cut her off, waving a dismissive hand. "Bartholomew Finch is retiring. He practically told me the job was mine last week. Tonight is just the coronation." He wanted that title more than he had ever wanted anything. It was the key to everything, the power, the respect, the life he truly deserved. A life with a woman like Crystal, a woman who shone as brightly as he did. He walked towards the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. He felt a fleeting, minuscule pang of something that might have been guilt, but he crushed it. This was necessary. Evolution. A snake shedding its skin. "Don't wait up," he said. The words a final, casual severance. He didn't look back as he stepped out of the apartment, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, sealing her inside their gilded cage. He didn't see her flinch, didn't see the way her shoulders slumped, or the way she brought a trembling hand to her lips. He didn't see the single tear that traced a path down her cheek before she deliberately, methodically, wiped it away. He saw only the future, and it was glittering, silver, and waiting for him in the back of another car downtown. As Gideon's elevator descended, Catherine walked over to the vast window overlooking the city. The lights of Manhattan glittered below, a galaxy of ambition and dreams. His dream was to conquer it. He never once stopped to ask what hers was. She picked up her own phone, not the simple one she used for groceries and daily reminders, but a sleek, encrypted device hidden in her study. She scrolled to a single contact, marked only with a single initial, B. She typed a short, simple message. "He's on his way. Are we ready?" The reply came back in seconds. "The stage is set, Madam Chairwoman. We are ready." Catherine took a deep, steadying breath. The first truly full breath she'd felt she'd taken in years. She looked at her reflection, not in the dark glass of the window, but in the polished screen of the device in her hand. The reflection of the woman in the simple navy dress flickered, and for a moment she saw the Queen underneath. Tonight wasn't Gideon's coronation. It was hers. The grand atrium at the Metropolitan Arts Pavilion was a cathedral of modern excess. Soaring white marble columns held up a glass ceiling that revealed the bruised twilight sky. Orchestral music drifted through the air, a classy veneer over the raw, seething ambition of the crowd below. This was the beating heart of New York Fashion Week, and Gideon Vance felt its rhythm in his blood. He made his entrance not with a bang, but with a calculated, seismic shockwave. On his arm was Crystal Monroe. She was everything Catherine was not, draped in a liquid silver gown that seemed poured onto her statuesque frame. Crystal was a supernova. Her hair was a cascade of platinum blonde. Her smile was a weapon, and her eyes scanned the room with the hungry appraisal of a predator who knows she's the most dangerous thing in the jungle. Every camera flash seemed to find them, the frantic clicks creating a wall of sound that was music to Gideon's ears. He saw the whispers start immediately. He saw Penelope Graves, the city's most feared fashion blogger, her fingers already flying across her phone's screen, her expression a mixture of shock and glee. He saw his colleagues from Aurelian Vanguard, their eyes widening, some with disapproval, others with a grudging respect for his sheer audacity. This was more than just bringing a date. This was a declaration of intent, a public execution of his marriage. "Darling, everyone is staring," Crystal purred, pressing herself closer to him. Her touch was electric, a jolt of validation. "Let them stare," Gideon murmured, his voice low and confident. He steered her towards the main champagne bar, his hand possessively on the small of her back. "Tonight we give them something to talk about for the rest of the year." He felt powerful, untouchable. He had outgrown Catherine, outgrown the quiet, respectable life she represented. That life was a starter home. He was ready for the palace. Crystal was the queen he had chosen to install. "Gideon!" What a surprise! The voice belonged to Howard Finch, the son of the outgoing chairman, a man whose position was built on nepotism rather than talent. Howard's eyes darted from Gideon to Crystal and back again, a sly, knowing smirk on his face. "And who is this vision?" Gideon's smile widened. This was the moment, the first brick in his new empire. "Howard, I'd like you to meet Crystal Monroe, my muse," he said, loading the word with significance. "Crystal, this is Howard Finch." "Charmed," Crystal said, extending a hand, her voice a husky whisper that promised secrets and sin. "The pleasure is all mine," Howard oozed, already captivated. "A muse, you say? I wasn't aware you were looking for new inspiration, Gideon. Where has Catherine been hiding tonight?" The question was a barb, and Gideon felt it, but he parried it with effortless arrogance. "Catherine is indisposed," he said, his tone suggesting a delicate, private matter, rather than a brutal discarding. "She understands that my work requires a certain public-facing dynamism. Crystal embodies the new direction I envision for Aurelian Vanguard." It was a bold, almost treasonous statement. He was already speaking as if he were in charge, redefining the company's image in his own. He was laying claim to the throne in front of the prince. They moved through the crowd, a vortex of glamour and gossip. Gideon introduced Crystal to designers, to editors from Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, to the money men who kept the gears of the fashion world turning. With each introduction, he solidified her position, and by extension, his own. He used phrases like the future face of the brand and a new era of inspiration. He was writing a new narrative for himself in real time, and Crystal was his co-author. She played her part with masterful precision. She was charming, witty, and deferential enough to the right people, while exuding an aura of untouchable stardom. She spoke of Gideon's genius, his unparalleled vision, and how he was unshackled now to truly achieve his destiny. They were a team, a power couple forged in ambition and presented to the world for its adoration. Gideon spotted Penelope Graves watching them from near a marble pillar, her expression unreadable. He decided to confront the narrative head-on. Leading Crystal over, he greeted the blogger with a disarming smile. "Penelope, always a pleasure. I see you've noticed the evening's main event." Penelope's eyes, sharp as a tailor's needles, took in the sight of them. "Gideon, you've certainly made a statement, a rather bold one. The press corps is having a field day. Gideon Vance debuts new muse as wife is a no-show. Is that the headline you were hoping for?" "The right headline writes itself when the story is compelling enough," Gideon retorted smoothly. "Aurelian Vanguard isn't about playing it safe. It's about vision, passion, and daring to embrace the future. That's what Crystal represents. That's what I represent." He was high on his own audacity. The champagne, the flashing lights, the intoxicating presence of Crystal on his arm. It all combined into a potent drug. He felt like a king surveying his court, completely unaware that the ground beneath his throne was about to crumble into a bottomless abyss. He was so focused on the spectacle of Crystal's arrival that he failed to notice the true arrivals of the evening. He didn't see the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, the way the most powerful players, the board members, the old money investors, weren't looking at him and his glittering mistress. Their attention was being drawn elsewhere, towards the stage, where preparations were being made for an announcement that had nothing to do with the head of North American operations. It was an announcement that would redefine power in their world, and Gideon Vance, in his moment of supreme arrogance, was about to become a footnote in a story far grander and more terrible than he could ever imagine. The gala was in full swing, a symphony of clinking glasses, feigned laughter, and the relentless, unspoken jockeying for position. Gideon was at the center of his own storm, and he was reveling in the chaos. He held court near the towering ice sculpture of the Aurelian Vanguard logo, a triumphant smirk permanently affixed to his face. "The brand has become stagnant, you see," he explained to a trio of influential retailers, his voice pitched just loud enough to be overheard. "Bartholomew is a legend, but his time has passed. We need blood, we need fire. We need to appeal to a new generation that values authenticity and boldness." He gestured vaguely towards Crystal, who was laughing with a famous film director nearby. "We need a narrative that feels alive." The retailers, men in their late 60s who had seen ambitious young executives come and go, nodded politely, their expressions non-committal. They had heard this speech before, in various forms, from countless young Turks who thought they had reinvented the wheel. But Gideon's confidence was infectious, and the very public drama he had orchestrated lent his words a certain weight. He wasn't just talking about change, he was embodying it. He felt a hand on his arm. It was Gregory Thorne, the company's chief financial officer, a man whose personality was as grey as his suit. "Gideon, a word?" Gideon sighed internally but maintained his polished exterior. "Gregory, enjoying the party?" "It's an expensive party," Gregory said, his eyes humorless. "Listen, Gideon, what you're doing here, it's risky. The board values stability, tradition, publicly shaming your wife, a woman who's been nothing but graceful, while cozying up to, well, it's not a good look." Gideon let out a short, sharp laugh. "Gregory, my friend, you're a numbers man. You don't understand branding. Good looks are manufactured. I'm manufacturing a new one. Power isn't about stability anymore. It's about disruption. And Catherine represents stability. A quiet, comfortable, and utterly boring stability. That's not the future. She isn't the future." He said the final words with such dismissive finality that even Gregory, a man known for his stoicism, seemed taken aback. "Be that as it may," the CFO said, lowering his voice. "Old Mr. Finch is a great admirer of your wife. He speaks of her fondly. He might not appreciate this spectacle." "Bartholomew appreciates results," Gideon countered, his patience wearing thin. "And he knows I'm the only one with the guts to deliver them. He's about to name me his successor. A little spectacle will be forgiven when I double our stock price in the next 18 months. Gregory shook his head slowly, a grin set to his mouth. "Just be careful what you wish for, Gideon. The marble floors in this place are beautiful, but they're slippery." With that cryptic warning, the CFO melted back into the crowd. Gideon scoffed, dismissing the man as a relic. He scanned the room for Crystal and saw her in a deep conversation with a journalist from the New York Times. Perfect. She was planting the seeds, framing the narrative just as they had rehearsed. The story of the brilliant, stifled executive and his liberating new muse. The story of Gideon Vance, unleashed. he found himself drifting near a conversation between two of the board's oldest members, a pair of sisters, the formidable Henderson twins, who had inherited their father's seat and his skepticism. "Unprecedented," one was saying to the other. "To keep it quiet for so long, the discipline, the sheer audacity of it." "Father always said the Delacroix family were a different breed," the other replied, her voice a low conspiratorial hum. "They play the long game. They never show their hand until they're holding a royal flush." Gideon frowned, catching the name. Delacroix. He knew the name, of course. It was a legendary name in the world of European finance and textiles, a name synonymous with old-world power and unimaginable wealth. The family was notoriously reclusive, their empire managed through proxies and labyrinthine holding companies. Aurelian Vanguard itself was a subsidiary of one of those larger, more anonymous conglomerates. He had never given it much thought, other than knowing their ultimate benefactor was a shadowy, powerful entity. He assumed the Henderson twins were discussing some arcane business deal, some shift in the parent company's portfolio that had no bearing on his own imminent ascension. His world at that moment was blissfully small, revolving entirely around himself, his ambition, and the woman in the silver dress. He refilled his champagne flute, the bubbles fizzing against the crystal, mirroring the effervescent thrill in his veins. He was so close, the culmination of everything he had worked for, schemed for, and sacrificed for. He thought of Catherine again, a fleeting image of her in that drab navy dress. He imagined her at home, perhaps watching a dull documentary or reading a book, blissfully unaware that her world was being dismantled and auctioned off to the highest bidder. A small, cruel smile played on his lips. She had served her purpose. She had been the stable, respectable wife who helped him climb. But one does not take the ladder to the summit with them. One kicks it away so no one else can follow. The lights in the atrium began to dim, and a hush fell over the crowd. On stage, a podium was illuminated by a single, brilliant spotlight. Gideon's heart began to hammer in his chest. This was it. He found Crystal's hand and pulled her close, their bodies aligned as they turned to face the stage. "Showtime," he whispered in her ear, his voice thick with triumph. She squeezed his hand, her painted nails digging slightly into his skin. "Our show, darling," she corrected him. "Don't ever forget that." Oh, he wouldn't. He looked out at the sea of faces, turned towards the stage, all of them witnesses to his victory. The whispers on the marble had all been about him. He was sure of it. He was the story. He was the moment. The universe, in its grand design, had conspired to bring him to this perfect, triumphant peak. He was utterly, blissfully, and catastrophically wrong. The man who walked into the spotlight was Bartholomew Finch. He was 80 years old, with a mane of white hair and a presence that commanded silence, without him having to utter a word. He represented the old guard of fashion, a world of elegance, tradition, and quiet, unshakable power. His retirement was the end of an era, and the beginning, Gideon was certain, of his own. Bartholomew tapped the microphone, the soft sound echoing through the cavernous space. "Good evening, friends, colleagues, visionaries," he began, his voice a gravelly but warm baritone. "For 40 years, I have had the distinct honor of standing at the helm of Aurelian Vanguard. We have dressed movie stars and royalty. We have defined decades and weathered the storms of changing tastes. We have built more than a brand. We have built a legacy." The crowd applauded politely. Gideon stood a little straighter, a confident smile fixed on his face. He felt Crystal press against him, a silent signal of shared victory. But legacy, Bartholomew continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, is not a monument to be admired. It is a living thing. It must be nurtured, it must be challenged, and at times it must be completely reimagined by a new and fearless leader. Gideon's heart hammered against his ribs. Fearless leader. He was describing him. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him. They knew. Everyone knew. Many of you are expecting me to announce my successor as CEO of Aurelian Vanguard tonight, Finch said, a sly twinkle in his eye. And we will get to that. But first, there is a far more significant announcement to be made. One that concerns the very ownership and future direction of our parent company, the Delacroix Global Holdings. Gideon felt a flicker of confusion. Delacroix? Why was he talking about the holding company? It was a distant, faceless entity. He wanted to hear his name, to feel the applause wash over him. This was an unnecessary delay. As many of you know, the Delacroix family has always valued its privacy, Bartholomew explained. For the last 50 years, the empire has been managed by a board of trustees, awaiting the heir to come of age and decide to take their rightful place at the head of the table. That time has come. A murmur went through the crowd. This was unexpected. The reclusive Delacroix heir was taking control. This changed everything. The Henderson twins were now staring at the stage, their mouths slightly agape. They had known. Gideon's mind raced. What did this mean for him? Would a new, unknown owner honor Finch's choice for CEO? A knot of anxiety began to form in his stomach. This was not going according to his script. The heir is not some distant stranger, Finch's voice boomed, pulling Gideon from his spiraling thoughts. This individual has been among us for years, watching, learning, waiting for the right moment to claim what is theirs. A person who understands our world not from a spreadsheet, but from within. A person of immense strength, patience, and quiet resolve. Gideon scanned the faces of the most powerful people in the room. Was it one of them? Some European duke he'd never met? A banking scion working under a pseudonym? His confidence began to fray at the edges, the fine threads of his arrogance unraveling one by one. This transition of power has been in the works for over a year, Finch declared, his voice rising with theatrical gravity. And tonight I have the profound and historic honor of ceding my position. Not just as CEO of Aurelian Vanguard, but as the interim chairman of the board for Delacroix Global Holdings. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The silence in the room was absolute, a perfect vacuum of anticipation and shock. "It is my great privilege," Bartholomew Finch said, his voice ringing with a mixture of reverence and triumph, "to introduce you to the new majority shareholder, the inheritor of the Delacroix fortune, and the new chairwoman of the entire global enterprise." Gideon held his breath. His entire future hung on the next few words. Finch smiled, a wide, genuine, and almost paternal smile as he looked out into the crowd, his eyes seeming to find a specific spot in the shadows. "Please welcome Mrs. Catherine Delacroix Vance." The name struck Gideon with the physical force of a lightning bolt. Catherine Delacroix Vance. For a frozen second, the words did not compute. They were a random assemblage of sounds, a glitch in the audio system, a cruel joke. He turned his head slightly, a disbelieving frown creasing his brow, expecting to see some other, older, more formidable Catherine step out from the wings. But there was no one else. The name echoed in the profound silence of the atrium. Catherine Delacroix Vance, his Catherine, his quiet, mousy, wallpaper wife. It was impossible. It was absurd. It was... And then he saw her. She emerged not from the wings of the stage, but from a private corridor at the side of the hall, a path reserved for honored guests and royalty. The transformation was so absolute, so breathtaking, that it defied belief. Gone was the simple navy dress, the sensible shoes, the apologetic posture. The woman who walked into the soft glow of a follow spotlight was a queen. She wore a bespoke gown of emerald green silk that shimmered like a living thing, its cut severe and elegant. Diamonds, real and spectacular, glittered at her throat and ears, the legendary Delacroix emeralds, rumored to have been lost for a generation. Her hair, once pinned in a modest bun, was styled in a sleek, powerful chignon that highlighted the aristocratic lines of her face. But it was her expression that shattered Gideon's world. The gentle, accommodating softness was gone, replaced by a cool, unshakable composure. Her eyes, which had for years only reflected his own image back at him, now held a deep, ancient power. She walked with a grace and purpose he had never seen, her every step silent and deliberate on the marble floor. The sound in the room returned all at once, a tidal wave of gasps, frantic whispers, and the explosion of 100 camera flashes. Penelope Graves looked as though she had seen a ghost, her phone nearly slipping from her trembling fingers. Gregory Thorne, the CFO, simply nodded to himself, as if he had finally seen the punchline to a very long, very complicated joke. Howard Finch's jaw was on the floor. Gideon couldn't breathe. His lungs had seized, his blood turning to ice in his veins. He felt Crystal's hand go limp in his, then slip away entirely. He looked at her. The color had drained from her face, her vixen smile replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Her eyes darted between Gideon and the regal figure approaching the stage, the frantic calculations visible on her face. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star. Catherine reached the stage and ascended the small set of stairs, Bartholomew Finch extending a hand to her, which she took with a small, gracious nod. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect, before retreating to the side of the stage. Catherine stepped up to the podium. She didn't seem nervous. She seemed home. She adjusted the microphone, the small movement commanding more authority than any of Gideon's blustering speeches. Her eyes scanned the stunned audience, a sea of famous, powerful, and influential faces, all of them now utterly captivated by her. And then her gaze found Gideon. Across the vast, crowded room, their eyes locked. There was no hatred in her expression, no anger, no tears. There was something far worse, a calm, piercing, and utterly detached assessment. It was the look a scientist might give a specimen under a microscope just before dissecting it. In that single, silent glance, she stripped him of everything: his arrogance, his ambition, his self-delusion. He was no longer the powerful executive, the master of his own destiny. He was just a man, small and insignificant, who had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The whispers around him grew louder, a chorus of his own ruin. "Vance? Her name is Vance? She's married to him." My God, he brought his mistress. Did you see his face? He had no idea. The ultimate power move. She let him hang himself with his own rope. Crystal took a small, then a larger step away from him, then another. She was creating distance, disentangling herself from the wreckage. Gideon was radioactive, and she was fleeing the fallout zone. He stood frozen, a statue of hubris in a Tom Ford suit, as his wife, the woman he had dismissed as a footnote in his life, prepared to read his eulogy to the entire world. The thunder of her name was still ringing in his ears, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the storm had only just begun. Catherine's voice, when she finally spoke, was not loud, but it filled the cavernous hall with an astonishing clarity. It was the same soft voice she had used to ask him if he wanted coffee, but now it was imbued with a steely resonance that commanded absolute attention. "Thank you, Bartholomew," she began, her gaze leaving Gideon to address the crowd, "for your stewardship, for your friendship, and for keeping my family's legacy safe until I was ready to claim it." She then turned her attention to the assembled guests. "Many of you are surprised to see me here. For 12 years I have been content to live a quiet life. I believe that to truly understand an empire, one must first understand its people, not from a boardroom, but from the ground up. I have watched this company. I have studied its strengths and identified its weaknesses. And I have learned a great deal about character, about loyalty, and about betrayal." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and Gideon felt each one pierce his skin. He was suffocating, drowning in the shocked and scornful stares of the very people he had spent his life trying to impress. He saw Crystal slipping through the crowd, her silver dress a streak of light as she fled towards the exit, a rat deserting a sinking ship. She didn't even give him a backward glance. Aurelian Vanguard, and indeed all of Delacroix Global Holdings, is entering a new era, Catherine continued, her voice gaining strength. An era of integrity, innovation, and strength. We will be cutting away the parts of this organization that have grown decadent, dishonest, or disloyal. We will reward talent and vision, but we will no longer tolerate arrogance and duplicity. Our future will be built on a foundation of respect. Effective immediately, the board has approved my proposed restructuring plan. A new wave of murmurs swept the room. She already had a plan. She had a board's approval. This wasn't a recent development. This had been in motion for months, perhaps years. While he was plotting his tawdry little affair and his petty promotion, she had been moving armies and redrawing maps. Her speech was brief, powerful, and visionary. She outlined a future for the company that was both exciting and ruthless. She finished by thanking everyone for their attendance and promised a new dawn for the company. The atrium erupted in thunderous applause. It was genuine, fervent applause for the unexpected queen who had just claimed her throne. As the applause subsided and the lights came up, a swarm of journalists and well-wishers surged towards the stage, all desperate for a word with the new empress of fashion. But Catherine held up a hand, and two large, impeccably dressed men from her security detail materialized, creating a clear path for her as she descended the stairs. She ignored the clamoring reporters, her eyes fixed on one target, Gideon. She walked towards him, the crowd parting before her like the Red Sea. The whispers died in her wake. The air crackled with tension. Gideon was rooted to the spot, a prisoner awaiting his sentence. She stopped a few feet from him. Up close, her transformation was even more profound. The power coming off her was a palpable force. "Hello, Gideon," she said, her voice now a low, private murmur that was more terrifying than any shout. "Catherine, I don't understand," he stammered, his mind a vortex of confusion and terror. "Delacroix, your family." "My mother was the last direct heir," she explained calmly, as if discussing the weather. "When she and my father passed away, the estate was placed in trust until I turned 35, or until I felt I was ready to lead. I chose to wait. I wanted to live a normal life. I wanted to see if I could be loved for who I was, not for what I had. I wanted to see what kind of man I had married when he thought no one of consequence was watching." She paused, her eyes holding his. "And you showed me." The cold, simple truth of it crashed down on him. Their entire life together, his entire career, had been a test, a long, elaborate, 12-year character evaluation, and he had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. "The promotion you were so sure about," she continued, her voice devoid of any emotion. "The position of head of North American operations. I dissolved it this afternoon. It's a redundant position, a vanity title." He flinched as if she had struck him. "Your shares in the company, which were granted as part of your executive compensation package, are subject to a morality clause. A clause that I personally drafted with our legal team 6 months ago. Publicly flaunting an affair while representing the company is, I believe, a flagrant violation. They will be forfeit. Of course, you are welcome to challenge it in court." A tiny ghost of a smile touched her lips. "My lawyers are the best in the world." He could say nothing. His throat was raw, his tongue a leaden weight in his mouth. "As for your employment," she said, delivering the final, fatal blow, "your services are no longer required at Aurelian Vanguard or any of its subsidiaries. Your access has been revoked. The contents of your office will be couriered to you, to your new address, wherever that may be." She motioned discreetly with her head. 2 more security men moved to flank Gideon. "These gentlemen will escort you from the premises," Catherine said, her tone final. "Your presence is no longer welcome." She turned to walk away, her back straight, her emerald gown flowing behind her. "Catherine, wait!" The desperate cry was torn from Gideon's throat. She stopped but didn't turn around. "After all we've been through, after everything, don't I deserve something?" he pleaded, his voice cracking, his entire world reduced to this one pathetic appeal. She paused for a long moment. Then she turned her head slightly, looking at him over her shoulder. Her expression was not one of pity, but of a strange, remote sadness, the kind one feels for a creature that has proven to be a profound disappointment. "You already had something, Gideon," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 12 wasted years. "You had everything, and you threw it all away for a cheap imitation." With that, she walked on, disappearing into the crowd of her new subjects, leaving Gideon Vance standing alone in the ruins of his life, with only his public humiliation and 2 security guards for company. The reckoning was complete. The weeks that followed the Vanguard Gala were a brutal education for Gideon Vance. The story was everywhere, an irresistible cocktail of wealth, betrayal, and revenge. Penelope Graves's blog post, titled "The Queen in the Navy Dress," went viral, cementing the narrative of the underestimated wife and the fool of a husband. Gideon became a pariah overnight. His name was a punchline in boardrooms and a cautionary tale at cocktail parties. The friends who had once clamored for his attention now crossed the street to avoid him. His calls to headhunters went unreturned. He was professionally and socially bankrupt. Stripped of his company credit cards and access to their joint accounts, he was forced to move into a soulless corporate apartment, a stark contrast to the penthouse he had once called home. The boxes from his office arrived, filled with useless awards and photos of a life that no longer existed. He tried to call Crystal once, but her number was disconnected. A week later, he saw a paparazzi photo of her on the arm of a grizzled film producer in his 70s. She was a survivor, and he had been just a stepping stone on her path. Meanwhile, Catherine Delacroix-Vance was on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Vogue simultaneously. The world was fascinated by her story, but even more so by her actions. She was not a figurehead. She was a force. Her first act as chairwoman was to clean house. She systematically removed the executives who had thrived on sycophancy and backstabbing, promoting instead the quiet, brilliant designers and strategists Gideon had overlooked or actively suppressed. She axed his vanity projects, redirecting the funds into sustainable materials research and an apprenticeship program for underprivileged youth. She moved with a speed and precision that left the industry breathless. Her public persona was one of quiet authority and formidable intelligence. In interviews, she spoke not of her personal life, but of her vision for a more ethical and innovative future for fashion. When one bold journalist dared to ask about her ex-husband, her response was chilling in its finality. "My past is a private matter," she said, her expression unreadable. "My focus is on the future, and Mr. Vance is not in it." The message was clear. He had been erased. Catherine moved into the Delacroix ancestral home on the Upper East Side, a grand limestone mansion that had been kept dormant for decades. Her loyal assistant, Bernard, who had served her family for years while posing as a simple household manager, was now her official chief of staff. Together, they worked tirelessly, reshaping the global conglomerate in her image. One crisp autumn evening, months after the gala, Catherine stood in her new office on the top floor of the Aurelian Vanguard building. It was the same office Bartholomew Finch had occupied, but she had redecorated it completely. The dark mahogany and leather had been replaced with clean lines, modern art, and a vast glass wall that overlooked the glittering expanse of Manhattan. She held a glass of wine, not champagne, and looked down at the city lights. They were the same lights she had looked at from the penthouse she had shared with Gideon, but now the view was different. Before, she had been a spectator. Now, she was a master of this universe. There were moments, late at night, when a shadow of the past would touch her. A phantom ache for the man she thought she had married, the dream of a simple life she had once cherished. But the feeling was fleeting, like a cloud passing in front of the sun. The betrayal had been a brutal, painful fire, but it had burned away the illusions, leaving behind something harder, stronger, and far more real. It had forged her into the leader she was born to be. Bernard entered the office quietly, holding a tablet. "Madam Chairwoman, the quarterly projections are in. We are up 17% across all sectors." Catherine smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Bernard. A good start." "Indeed," he replied. "And a final piece of news. The law firm representing Mr. Vance contacted our legal team today. He is dropping his challenge to the forfeiture of his shares. They say he can no longer afford the legal fees." Catherine simply nodded, taking a slow sip of her wine. There was no triumph in her, no gloating. It was just a loose end being tied, a final chapter closing. Gideon Vance was no longer a villain or a ghost in her life. He was simply irrelevant, a faded photograph from a past she had long since transcended. She was Catherine Delacroix now, first and foremost. She had shed the name Vance, along with the woman who had worn it. She looked out at the endless city, at the dawn of her own empire, and felt not the weight of her legacy, but the lightness of her own limitless future. She was finally, completely, and gloriously free. 6 months had passed since the night the world turned on its axis. The vibrant chaos of autumn had given way to the stark, quiet beauty of a New York winter. Snow fell in thick, silent flakes outside the tall arched windows of Catherine Delacroix's private study, blanketing the city in a pristine layer of white. The mansion was quiet, a sanctuary of calm against the ceaseless hum of the empire she now commanded. The name Vance felt like something from another lifetime, a poorly fitting coat she had long since discarded. She was reviewing a proposal for a new sustainable textile factory in Scandinavia, her mind sharp and focused, when Bernard entered the room, his expression unusually troubled. "Madam Chairwoman," he began, his voice a low murmur. "You have a visitor." "I told him you were unavailable," But he refuses to leave. He said he will wait in the snow all night if he has to. Catherine didn't look up from her papers. I'm not expecting anyone. Who is it? Bernard hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. It's Gideon Vance. Catherine's hand stilled. A flicker of something. Not surprise, not anger, but a weary, distant memory passed through her. She had expected this, in a way. Not today. Not necessarily ever. But she knew his pride was a stubborn beast, and it would likely need one final, definitive death before it released him. She had lawyers and security to handle this. A simple phone call and he would be gone, a non-entity once more. She looked out the window at the swirling snow, at the man she could just make out standing by the ornate front gates, a lone, dark figure without an umbrella, his shoulders dusted with white. He looked small against the grandeur of her home, against the vastness of the city. "Very well, Bernard," she said, her voice calm and even. "Show him into the west parlour. Give him a towel and some tea. I will be down in 5 minutes." Bernard's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he simply nodded. "As you wish, madam." As he left, Catherine stood and walked to the window, observing the pathetic figure for a moment longer. This wasn't a test for him. It was a test for her. Could she face the ghost of her past without flinching? Could she confront the man who had shattered her heart without letting a single crack show in the formidable woman she had become? She felt a profound, settling calm. Yes, she could. When she entered the west parlour, he was standing by the unlit fireplace, awkwardly holding a cup of tea. The change in him was shocking. The impeccably tailored suits were gone, replaced by a simple wool coat that hung loosely on his frame, worn jeans, and scuffed boots. He was thinner, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind a hollow, haunted look. The sharp, predatory angles of his face had softened into a mask of weariness and defeat. He was no longer the king he had imagined himself to be. He was just a man who had lost his way. "Gideon," she said. Her voice didn't betray a single emotion. He flinched at the sound and turned to face her. "Catherine." Her name was a raw, broken thing on his tongue. "Thank you for seeing me." "Why are you here?" she asked, choosing to stand rather than sit, maintaining a sense of formal distance. "If this is about money, you should speak to my lawyers. If it's about anything else, I can't imagine we have anything left to discuss." "It's not about money," he said quickly, shaking his head. He placed the untouched tea on the mantelpiece, his hand trembling slightly. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I need to understand." "Understand what?" "The test," he said, his voice cracking. "Gregory Thorne told me. He said you were always watching. That our whole marriage was some kind of evaluation. Was any of it real? Or was I just some lab rat in your 12-year experiment?" Catherine looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly see the wreckage he had become. She felt not pity, but a profound, aching sadness for the waste of it all. "It was all real, Gideon," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "That was the tragedy of it. I didn't marry you as an experiment. I fell in love with a charming, ambitious, brilliant man whom I believed had a good heart. I loved him. I built a life for him. I was happy." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "The test, as you call it, didn't begin with a plan. It began with a disappointment. Then another. And another. It began when I saw your ambition start to curdle into arrogance. When your desire for success became a willingness to step on anyone to achieve it. When the man I married started to disappear, replaced by a stranger who wore his face and cared only for himself. Tears welled in Gideon's eyes. So you just watched? You let me become that person? You never said anything. What would I have said? She countered, a touch of steel returning to her voice. That your ambition was making you cruel. That the compliments you gave me were laced with condescension. That I knew you were lying about your late nights for a year before you even met Crystal. You wouldn't have listened. The Gideon I was married to by then had no respect for my opinion. My words would have been like the wind. So, yes, I watched, and I waited. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped the man I loved would come back. But he never did. He finally broke, a ragged sob escaping his throat. I lost everything? No, Catherine said, her voice firm but not unkind. You didn't lose it. You traded it. You traded my love for public adoration. You traded our life for a promotion you thought you deserved. You traded a genuine partnership for a cheap imitation with a woman who valued your position, not your person. Those were your choices, Gideon. Not my test. He finally looked up, his face a ruin of regret. What do I do now? It was the question of a lost child, and it was the one thing she could not answer for him. She walked towards the door, her part in this final, painful conversation over. You start again, she said, her hand on the doorknob. And this time, you build a life based on something real, on character, on kindness. Build a man that you yourself can respect. Perhaps then, others will too. She opened the door and turned back to him one last time. Bernard will show you out. Goodbye, Gideon. She left him standing there, a ghost in a room full of memories, and walked back to her study without looking back. She did not feel triumph or the satisfaction of revenge. She felt only a quiet, somber sense of closure. The last echo of her old life had finally faded. Catherine sat at her desk and picked up the proposal for the Scandinavian factory. She looked at the plans, at the future she was building, a future of her own design. A small silver frame sat on the corner of her desk, a photo she rarely looked at. It was of her parents, standing on a hillside in France, smiling. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the image of her mother, a woman of immense strength who had also known heartache. She had honored their legacy. She had survived her fire, and now the entire world was waiting for her to reshape it. And she was more than ready. And that's how a quiet, overlooked wife turned the tables on her arrogant husband in the most public way imaginable. It's a story that reminds us that true power isn't always loud and flashy. Sometimes it's silent, patient, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Catherine didn't just reclaim her life, she claimed the empire that was rightfully hers, proving that the greatest strength often comes from being consistently underestimated. What would you have done in her position? Would you have sought such a public revenge, or handled it behind closed doors? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of shocking twists and ultimate justice, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Share it with a friend who loves a good revenge story. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more tales of drama and intrigue coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thanks for listening.